We all think we have a pretty good handle on the birds and the bees. It feels like such a foundational piece of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever stopped to consider that for, well, most of human history, our understanding of how babies are actually made was, well, wildly off the mark?
It's truly remarkable when you think about it. I mean, this fundamental process of life,
Hmm.
it's been seen through so many different lenses, ancient myths trying to explain
It's
things,
explicable.
and then these early scientific theories, but they were just, hampered by not having the tools we have now, microscopes and things. It's a story full of surprises, really.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to explore the fascinating historical path, the scientific perspectives on human reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look at that age-old fascination with virgin birth that keeps popping up and trace how our understanding of the roles of men and women in conception has evolved, often in fits and starts, it seems.
And to help us navigate this journey, we've got some really compelling material. We'll be drawing from a book that really delves into the science behind what it calls redesigning the rules of sex,
Okay.
which is great because it lets us travel through those historical beliefs, look at the key scientific discoveries, and even sort of glimpse at what future reproductive tech might hold.
So our mission for you in this deep dive is basically this.
Mm.
Let's unpack those old myths, get a handle on the scientific breakthroughs that really change things, and maybe touch on the potentially mind-bending stuff coming down the line with reproductive tech,
Yeah.
all while, keeping it engaging, hopefully sparking a few aha moments. Okay, let's jump right in.
Ancient beliefs, myths, virgin birth.
It feels like these stories are everywhere, right? Nearly every culture.
You're spot on. It's quite striking, the sheer ubiquity of these legends across different cultures, different times. You've got the Aztec myth of Coatlicue, pregnant from a ball of feathers, or the Egyptian story, Isis conceiving Horus after putting Osiris back together, and of course the Virgin Mary in Christian tradition. It's just a recurring theme in how humans tell stories.
And it wasn't only divine figures, was it? The sources mentioned some really unusual explanations for human virgin births, like getting pregnant from sunlight or eating magical fish. It makes you wonder, where did these ideas even start?
Well, if you think about let's say, the prevailing understanding of reproduction back then,
Right.
especially the classical view where women were seen as essentially passive vessels,
Okay, yeah.
these ideas maybe start to make a bit more sense within that context.
Mm-hmm.
If the main belief was that men provided the crucial seed of life and women were just the place for it to grow,
The incubator.
right, then the idea of maybe a divine force or even some natural force like sunlight directly starting that process in a woman, well, it might have seemed plausible. Her body was already at the site, so maybe other things could trigger it too.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. So this idea of female passivity really opened the door.
Oh.
Wow. It just highlights how limited their biological understanding was, which brings us nicely to those early scientific misconceptions. For centuries, figuring out how babies were made was largely guesswork, wasn't it?
Precisely. I mean, for a huge chunk of history, there was no systematic human dissection and no effective microscopes until, the 17th century.
Right.
So understanding the inner workings, it relied heavily on speculation on what you could see externally, which, created fertile ground for some really imaginative theories, though ultimately very wrong ones.
And Aristotle, huge figure here, right? The sources talk about his view that male semen contained this tiny, fully formed human, like a mini-me.
Yeah, the atomism idea applied to biology. He was such a massive intellect, but he essentially believed the complete blueprint, everything was in the male semen,
Everything.
the woman's role, just providing nourishment and space for this preformed being to grow. He even had these explanations for daughters, or what he called monstrosity.
Weak semen.
Weak semen. Or the mother's menstrual blood somehow messing things up because the male part wasn't strong enough. And crucially, he had basically zero detailed knowledge of female reproductive organs. It shows how deeply that idea of male dominance was baked in. It skewed everything.
Then centuries later, you get Galen.
Yeah.
And he sort of flips things,
but still through a pretty biased lens, it sounds like, his reversal theory.
Galen, building on some earlier ideas, he proposed that women were essentially inverted males.
Inverted males?
Yeah, he theorized female genitalia were just inverted versions of male ones. Ovaries were incomplete tests, producing a kind of inferior female semen. He even suggested the uterus was an inside-out scrotum.
Wow. And the sources mentioned he thought women were inherently colder,
which fed into this idea of them being physiologically inferior. It's quite something, seeing those societal biases just woven right into the science.
It really hammers home how societal prejudice can shape scientific thought, even when it seems objective. Galen's ideas weren't just anatomy. They were tangled up with beliefs about gender, about men being hot and active, women cold and passive. He even did experiments, though flawed, that seemed to prove women were colder. It reflected the social hierarchy.
And these ideas had real staying power, didn't they? We jumped centuries ahead to Paracelsus, 16th century, and he's still echoing those ancient Greek ideas. Man's semen has it all, woman is just the soil.
Exactly. Even with Renaissance advances in anatomy, those old doctrines held strong. Paracelsus, a big medical figure himself, was convinced the man's semen held the complete essence. His analogy using horse manure instead of a womb,
Yeah, I read that.
it really emphasizes that view. Woman as incubator, providing zero genetic material herself. These metaphors tell you a lot about the underlying beliefs.
Which then leads to these almost unbelievable but also kind of tragic situations, like Catherine de' Medici getting blamed for infertility, when it really sounds like her husband, Henry II, probably had a physical issue, hypospadias, making insemination difficult. It's heartbreaking, the personal toll these misunderstandings took, especially on women.
That's a perfect illustration of the real-world impact. Because the dominant theory put all the onus on the male seed and the female soil, any problems conceiving. Automatically the woman's fault?
Right.
Henry II's likely hypospadias probably made successful intercourse tough, but Catherine got the blame, went through all sorts of useless treatments. It just shows how deep these flawed theories ran.
It's astonishing how long these wrong ideas hung around, even when people started getting better tools like microscopes to actually look.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the dawn of microscopic discoveries. But even then, it seems like old biases died really hard.
You're absolutely right. The microscope, late 17th century, it gave us the first real peek into that microscopic world. But those first interpretations, often filtered right through those old entrenched beliefs. It's a powerful reminder of how preconceptions can shape what we literally think we see.
We have Leeuwenhoek finding animalcules in sperm, and then Hartsoeker's famous drawing of the homunculi, the tiny little people curled up inside the sperm head. That must have really cemented the idea of sperm being the sole contributor.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even with this amazing discovery, the spermist view got stronger. Hartsoeker's drawings, which were more imagination than observation, really, they showed these mini-humans in the sperm. He even called the egg no more than what is called the placenta.
Just the placenta.
Wow. Again, minimizing the female role to just nurturing this preformed thing from the male shows how new data can get twisted to fit old ideas.
And the sources point out that scientists looking through microscopes often saw things that weren't there, basically because they were still thinking along the lines of Aristotle and Galen. That confirmation bias is powerful.
It truly is. Existing beliefs shaped perception. Even with new microscopic evidence, those deep-rooted ideas about male dominance and female passivity were incredibly sticky. Science isn't always a straight line forward. Culture plays a role.
And things like Aristotle's masterpiece certainly didn't help. This super popular but wildly inaccurate mix of medieval medicine and folklore. It's shocking. Something so wrong was influential for so long, even when new science was contradicting it.
Oh, the long life of Aristotle's masterpiece is fascinating. It just shows how slowly scientific understanding can spread sometimes, and how misinformation can persist. Despite being outdated, wrong about reproduction, it was a go-to medical text for centuries, probably because it was accessible, maybe a bit sensational.
But there were dissenting voices, right? Like Harvey, the ovist, arguing that all life came from eggs, even in mammals.
Yes, Harvey was a big counter-argument, a real shift. Based on his work with bird and deer eggs, he proposed the egg was the fundamental source. Ex ova omnia, out of the egg all things, right on his book's frontispiece.
Right.
But, important point, he didn't have the tools to fully explain it for mammals. Mammalian eggs are tiny and much harder to see and study back then. So he was on the right path, but the full picture was still missing.
And then Leeuwenhoek, the sperm guy, he also found those aphids, seeing miniature aphids inside the females, suggesting reproduction without fertilization in that species. That must have thrown a wrench in the works for the spermists.
That was a crucial observation. It hinted that maybe you didn't always need the male contribution, at least not in every species. Leeuwenhoek's work with aphids gave early solid evidence for what we now call parthenogenesis. It was an anomaly, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the main theory.
Then we get to Richard Owen coining parthenogenesis, but even he seemed hesitant to ditch the male role entirely, clinging to this idea of spermatic virtue. What was that about?
Owen gave us the term, yeah, but his thinking was still tangled up in the old ideas. He theorized that even in virgin birth, there must have been some original fertilization way back that gave the egg this lingering spermatic virtue, a sort of power from the sperm, passed down generations without needing more sperm. It was kind of a halfway house between old and new thinking.
Darwin and Huxley were having none of that, were they? Huxley calling spermatic virtue ignorance writ large. You could almost feel the scientific frustration there.
Oh, their criticism was sharp. Huxley, big on empirical evidence. Darwin focused on natural selection and heredity. They both saw Owen's spermatic virtue as just, well, hand-waving. No scientific basis. Didn't fit with the new understanding of how traits are passed on. A real clash between tradition and emerging evolutionary biology.
It's fascinating hearing about those debates.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so eventually science gets to the true partnership, understanding the vital, equal roles of both sperm and egg. It's not a one-sided deal at all.
Absolutely not. Modern biology shows this incredibly intricate collaboration. I mean, the journey sperm take just to reach the egg, it's unbelievably tough, a super selective process. Only the strongest make it. Shows how critical successful fertilization is.
And the sperm's actual contribution isn't a mini-person, it's the DNA in its head. The genetic instructions, not the matter, Aristotle thought.
Precisely. When sperm meets egg, just the head gets in, delivering that crucial DNA package. The rest stays outside, mostly. That sperm DNA then merges with the egg's DNA. Boom, unique genetic blueprint for a new individual. A true fusion.
And this whole system, sexual reproduction, combining DNA from two parents, it goes way, way back, like 850 million years to early eukaryotes. The key advantage wasn't just copying, it was mixing things up genetic diversity.
That's fundamental. Earlier life forms, prokaryotes, they could swap DNA, but often more for repair.
Yeah.
Sex in eukaryotes was different. It allowed mixing whole genomes, creating offspring with brand new gene combinations. And interestingly, early eukaryotic sex seems to have been selected partly for its accuracy in copying the combined cells, protecting those new genetic mixes.
The sources use skin tone inheritance is a good example, right?
Huh.
How sex shuffles the gene variants for melanin from both parents, creating unique blends in kids, allowing populations to adapt.
Exactly. That recombination during sperm and egg formation, it means every kid gets a unique shuffle of their parents' genes. This constant reshuffling within a population is what fuels adaptation. It lets species respond to changing environments over time.
Which ties into the Red Queen hypothesis. This cool idea that sex helps species keep up in an evolutionary arms race, especially against things like parasites. Like you have to keep running genetically just to stay in the same place.
The Red Queen, yeah. It suggests sex gives a vital edge in that ongoing struggle. By generating diversity, sex makes it more likely some offspring will have the right traits to survive new threats involving parasites, diseases. Diversity, however you get it, seems key for long-term survival.
Plus, another big benefit of sex, getting rid of harmful mutations more efficiently. That's a pretty handy evolutionary perk.
Absolutely. Shuffling genes means harmful mutations can be masked by a healthier gene from the other parent, or sometimes eliminated if combinations are really bad. It stops harmful mutations building up too much over generations, keeps the species healthier overall.
And we even touched on sexual selection. Females may be preferring males who look less parasite-ridden, and that fascinating link between genes like the CFTR mutation, cystic fibrosis, and potential resistance to diseases like typhoid. It's all so interconnected.
For sure. Sexual selection, mate choice, can definitely push evolution towards traits linked to health. And the CFTR gene example, bad for cystic fibrosis, but maybe good against typhoid, shows that complex trade-off between genes and environmental pressures. It all shapes reproductive success.
Okay, so we've gone from myths to the sperm-egg partnership. But let's loop back to virgin birth itself, parthenogenesis. It's not just legend anymore, is it? Science sees it for real.
That's correct. Parthenogenesis, egg developing without fertilization, it's a real biological thing. We're seeing it more and more in the natural world, not just myths.
And the examples are surprising. Sharks, Komodo dragons, even turkeys and fruit flies. It's not just tiny invertebrates.
Indeed. Bonnethead sharks, blacktip sharks, seen in aquariums with only females, Komodo dragons in zoos, especially when isolated from males. And yeah, selective breeding has seriously ramped up parthenogenesis rates in Beltsville, small white turkeys, and in fruit flies. Shows there's a genetic component. Though in birds, that early embryo development in parthenogenic eggs can look pretty chaotic.
It's still kind of mind-boggling. An egg normally needs sperm to kickstart development, but somehow it can just go it alone.
Yeah.
What's the basic mechanism there?
Normally, the egg pauses its development at a stage called metaphase 2. It basically waits for the signal from the sperm to continue.
Okay.
But eggs have this amazing built-in potential. They can become any cell type in the body. Parthenogenesis is essentially the egg bypassing that pause, triggering itself to start dividing and differentiating, all without the sperm signal, like the pause button gets released spontaneously.
And then we have those ovarian teratomas in humans. The sources describe them as unfertilized eggs starting to develop, sometimes making hair, teeth, even things resembling a tiny homunculus. It's weirdly fascinating and a bit unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
So they are unfertilized eggs starting down the path, but they're not like a full virgin birth because the genetics get messed up, right? Often duplicating chromosomes, more like a developmental glitch.
Ovarian teratomas are exactly that unfertilized human egg starting to develop. And you're right, while they form complex tissues, they aren't true parthenogenetic individuals. They often end up with 46 chromosomes, not the normal 23 for an egg, and can even show heterozygosity, different gene versions, suggesting complex processes beyond simple self-activation. But crucially, they never have a Y chromosome.
Okay, so nature allows parthenogenesis in some animals, but humans. The sources get into that long fascination. And the really interesting case of Emery Jones in the 1950s, that must have caused a huge stir.
Oh, Emery Jones' claim definitely lit up the switchboards in Britain. Public and scientific interest exploded. A tabloid ran a big investigation, pulling in prominent scientists like J.B.S. Haldane and Helen Spurway to design tests.
They did blood tests, even skin graft compatibility tests between Emery and her daughter Monica. What did they find?
The results, as the sources lay out, were ultimately pretty inconclusive and actually cast significant doubt on the claim. Some blood tests showed similarities, sure, but the skin graft was the kicker.
It was rejected.
Monica's skin was rejected by her mother's body. That strongly implies genetic differences between them, differences that just shouldn't exist in true parthenogenesis, where the child should be genetically almost identical, like a clone or half-clone, depending on the mechanism.
So despite the headlines maybe saying doctors couldn't disprove male involvement, the science really pointed away from a true virgin birth for Emery Jones. The sources hint at other possibilities too.
Yeah, given the inconsistencies, especially the skin graft, the odds of a genuine virgin birth were vanishingly small. The sources mention other possibilities. Maybe intentional deception, or perhaps more likely, maybe Emery herself wasn't fully aware of the conception circumstances, especially given she'd been in a hospital around that time.
It really highlights the biological hurdles for mammals, doesn't it? Especially this thing called genomic imprinting. That's a big barrier for mammalian parthenogenesis.
Genomic imprinting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Certain genes act differently depending on whether you inherit them from your mother or your father. They're stamped, if you like.
Okay.
And for normal development in mammals, you need both the maternally imprinted and paternally imprinted versions of these key genes working correctly. Early attempts to make mice with two mothers or two fathers failed because of this. The imprinting wasn't right. You need both instruction manuals, moms and dads, for everything to work properly.
But scientists did eventually manage it, right? Creating fatherless mice, like Kaguya, by cleverly tweaking those imprinting genes. That sounds like a massive breakthrough.
The creation of Kaguya, yeah, born from two unfertilized eggs by painstakingly manipulating those imprinted genes. That was huge, a real landmark. The success rate was initially super low, like 1 in hundreds.
Wow.
But the fact they could do it at all showed the biological barriers weren't totally insurmountable, at least in principle. And interestingly, these fatherless mice, all female, and they could reproduce sexually themselves later on.
It really makes you think about the future, doesn't it? The sources briefly touch on rising infertility rates, both men and women, even the long-term questions about the Y chromosome, hinting that technology might offer radical solutions down the line.
Absolutely. The increase in infertility plus those ongoing scientific debates about the Y chromosome's future, it's definitely driving research into alternative reproductive tech. We're seeing advances in making eggs and sperm from stem cells,
Right.
and work on artificial wombs continues. It suggests a future where the usual biological rules of reproduction might get significantly rewritten.
It's been an incredible journey in this deep dive through history and science. Really makes you appreciate how much our understanding has shifted.
It really does. That seemingly simple question, how are babies made? It has such a rich, complex backstory, layers of myth, persistent errors, and then these amazing scientific discoveries revealing life's intricate mechanics.
And those aha moments, are pretty cool. Tracing that path from flawed ancient ideas to the sheer complexity of genetics today, and realizing reproduction can happen in unexpected ways, sometimes even bypassing the two-parent model.
Yeah, and what's striking is, while future tech might echo some old concepts of single-parent creation in a way, the reality of human reproduction now is just this incredible testament to the precise, intricate partnership of sperm and egg, a dance refined over millions of years of evolution.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with. As reproductive science keeps advancing so rapidly, how might our very definitions of parenthood, family, even sex itself keep evolving? Especially if things like artificial wombs or maybe even viable single-parent reproduction become more real. What are the big ethical, social questions that come with potentially redesigning the rules of sex? Definitely something to chew on.